Let me share my slides here. You seeing them okay? Commander Treadwell, like before?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Perfect. All right, let me try to bring my other screen up here. Okay. Well, I appreciate everybody. We're gonna go through this. I'll try to monitor the chat and try to keep an eye out for hand raising if anybody has any questions as we go along. We usually have plenty of time, so feel free to raise your hand or chime in on the chat. I'm Captain Joel Schofer. I'm the deputy at Portsmouth. Used to be the deputy corps chief, so I've given this talk a couple of times for the medical corps. Happy to do it. See if I can get my slide. There you go. Disclaimer. So first substantive slide is just to give you guys a little brief about why I'm talking about this. So really pretty early on in my career, I recognized that all of us as medical corps, we have really two jobs. We have to try to be the best doctors we can be, but then we're going to have a pretty significant income stream that we have to figure out how to manage, which is really our second job. So early on, I started reading books, and I read this book on the screen, The Automatic Millionaire, which is a really great book about basically automating your finances so you don't have to think about it and you just build wealth automatically. And one of the things it mentioned in the book was that if you really wanted to have options to, build wealth, retire earlier than normal, downshift to part-time, you're going to need to save 20 to 30% of your money for retirement. So that's irrespective of, that's just for retirement, not including college, houses, cars, anything else you're saving for. So for just about my entire career, I'm at 22 and a half years now, I've been paying myself every month. I track every dollar that comes into our household. And I started at 20%, and over about a year and a half, I built up to 30%. And I've been doing that ever since. So 30% of everything that comes in goes toward retirement. And then on this slide here, you'll see that I've lived what I would consider a reasonable lifestyle, which is, a lot of cars, Toyotas, Hondas, Fords, two Okinawan beaters that we paid, I think, $4,500 for combined. And then you can see my houses I've lived in kind of alternated between renting and buying. The most I've ever spent on a house is $407,000. It's the house I live in now. I think somebody's got a high mic out there. It might be Kyle Miller, but there you go, maybe. You combine 30% savings rate with, driving normal cars and kind of living in normal houses / renting. And I found myself, I could have retired at 20 years and as an 05 and just taken an 05 pension with what I built up and just not worked. What people describe as financially independent. And really what I want to do is to kind of give you guys the framework to try to get you guys to the same place. So the first step that we're going to talk about here is a brief one, but it's important. You have to find a way to track your finances, and it's really easy to do nowadays because there's all sorts of automated tools you can use to do it. I've used some of them. I've used Mint. I've used Personal Capital, which has got a new name. I forget what it is, but it's been bought. You can still get to it if you type in Personal Capital. I've never used You Need a Budget or YNAB. I know there's other ones out there like Every Dollar. All these things kind of link to your accounts automatically, both your assets and your debts, and then they keep track of your net worth and how you're doing. It's really impossible to know how you're doing without tracking your finances. What I currently do is my wife and I do. We have a Google sheet that I update every month when I do the investing, and so I do that every month, and then we do it together every year, once a year, where we look at it. And I make her do all the investing just in case something ever happens to me, so she has some idea of what she's doing. But either way, you got to find Empower. Yeah, that's the new name for Personal Capital. Saw that in the chat. But you guys just have to find a way to track your finances. Very easy to do nowadays, but impossible to know how you're doing unless you track it. Probably the next thing you need to do is take a look at your insurance, because there's probably some insurance people need that you may not have. Number one, you need to look into supplemental disability insurance. If any of us ever get injured and we can't practice, we're going to be compensated by the DoD and VA, but we won't be compensated like a normal, like a physician. We'll be compensated like a normal officer, which is not going to be reflective of the high physician income that you've been expecting. So we'll talk a little bit about where you can go to try to get some supplemental disability insurance. You also, in your life, you have liability coverage, and you usually get it from two places. You get it from your homeowners or renters insurance, and you get it from your auto insurance. But most of these policies will top out at $500,000, some of them as low as $300,000. So just because you don't have a lot of assets doesn't mean you can't be sued. Everybody that's in the medical corps is going to have a pretty significant seven-figure future income stream, and people can sue you for that. So it is widely recommended that every physician have what they call umbrella liability insurance. It's sold in $1 million increments. It's usually, until you have teenage kids that start to drive, pretty cheap. Usually costs about $200 or $300 per million. And you can just get it from whatever company you normally get your auto or homeowners or renters insurance from. So I gave this talk to the transitional interns yesterday here at Portsmouth, and they probably don't have a whole lot of assets, but they do have a future income stream. So at a minimum, I recommended to them that they all purchase at least $1 million of umbrella liability coverage, because then when you add that to their 300 or 500,000 that they've got from their auto or homeowners, they will have 1.3 to 1.5 million dollars of coverage, which is a lot better than 300 to 500,000. It's really impossible to know if you ever do have one of these claims how much is going to be enough, which is why I have that in quotes. It's a fairly common recommendation that you have enough liability insurance to cover your net worth up to 5 million. Most companies will stop selling you. Many companies will stop selling you anything above 5 million. So you kind of get to 5 million and then you stop. That's a pretty common recommendation as well. When it comes to insurance, you might need, if you have anybody out there that is reliant on you financially, that if you would die, they would be adversely impacted, that you probably need insurance for life insurance. And they love to sell doctors whole life insurance, but you should probably only buy term. And it's really tough to cover everything in under an hour. So I'm going to refer you guys to a lot of blog posts. So probably the most common place I'll refer you is the White Coat Investor, which probably a lot of people that are listening already read. But if you go to that link there, what you need to know about whole life insurance, you'll read about all the reasons why you shouldn't really buy whole life insurance. You just buy term life insurance so that it's cheaper and you pay for it for the term you need it, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, whatever you decide. And then when it's gone, you probably will no longer need it because your kids are out of the house and you have a significant net worth and you're no longer paying for it. Moonlighting malpractice, we will talk about that. You're going to want to make sure that when you moonlight, you know your insurance situation and whether you're going to need a tail coverage or not. So where can you guys get disability insurance? And I would tell everybody that they need to buy it, but I do think that it is expensive, as we'll talk about. So I think everybody needs to look into it and at least think about it. There's probably nothing more devastating than expecting to have a career filled with a physician's income only to get hurt and no longer be able to practice. And a lot of us, if that happened early in our career and we hadn't built resources or finances so far, we wouldn't be very happy being considered a disabled normal O3 or O4. I think a lot of us would find the VA and DoD compensation to be inadequate. So everybody probably needs to look into getting supplemental disability insurance. I would go to these two places, DI4MDs.com. That's where I got mine when I had it. Physician Financial Services, that guy's Larry Keller. He does a lot of work for the White Coat Investor. Both of these people are very knowledgeable on how to get disability insurance for military physicians and dentists. I don't get anything from these folks if you use them, but they do know that I brief their stuff and they get phone calls and emails and things after I give this brief. So if you mention that you heard it from me, they may it wouldn't be a shock to them. It is often cheaper if you're purchased during GME training, and you also usually can't purchase it if you're OCONUS or deployed. So I just found out I'm going to Guam next. I would have to buy it before I went to Guam. I probably wouldn't be able to get it if I was in Guam or if I was about to deploy. So make sure you guys check into this. It does tend to be expensive, but again, it is something that everybody, I think, needs to look into because, other than dying, there really wouldn't be anything that'd be more devastating to your financial life than getting disabled and not being able to practice, especially if it happens early in your career. If you guys are going to moonlight out there, you want to make sure you know what kind of insurance you have. In general, there's two types. There's occurrence and there's claims made, one of which requires purchasing what we call a tail policy. So a claims made policy is the more common type because it's cheaper. It only covers you while you're moonlighting for that entity. And when you leave, you have to purchase a tail policy. Now, what you're going to want to know when you're moonlighting is, are you going to need to purchase a tail? And if you are, who's going to pay for it? Is it going to be them or is it going to be you? Because it's quite possible that you could moonlight, make a certain amount of money, only to find out that when you leave, because you're in a high-risk specialty, that you have to purchase a tail that might even cost more than what you made moonlighting. That's certainly happened to people. It will probably happen to people again in the future. It's much better to have occurrence-based insurance, but it also tends to be more expensive and therefore is less prevalent. So if you're going to moonlight, make sure you know whether you're going to need a tail and figure out who is going to pay for it. Third step is to make sure you have an idea of if there's an emergency, where are you going to go for the money? It's generally recommended that you have 3 to 6 months of living expenses, not income, but expenses, stashed away somewhere, making some interest where you can get at it if you need it in a quick fashion. Usually the two places you're going to most commonly keep this money are either in a high yield savings or money market account with a bank. Usually it's going to be an online bank. I personally have a high yield savings account with Ally Bank, although there are others. And then also the other place to keep it would be in a money market fund, which is something you would open up at whatever company you use to do your investing. So for me, it's going to be Vanguard, as you're going to hear, but you can open these up basically anywhere you invest, a Schwab, Fidelity, whatever you're using. And what you'll find is, you want to keep your money in the place where it's going to earn the most interest. A couple of years ago, I was making 0.5% in my high yield Ally savings account, and my Vanguard money market funds were paying like 0. So I kept the money in my Ally high yield savings. Today, it's flipped. My money's in the money market fund because it's making in the 5% range, whereas Ally's paying in the low 4s. I think it was exactly 4 last time I checked, although it might have gone up. There's definitely people out here that have money sitting in a savings account somewhere that's probably making nowhere close to 5% because many of the large traditional banks have not raised their savings yields to keep up with interest. So what you should probably do is establish a high yield savings account somewhere and a money market fund with your investing, and then just keep the money wherever you're making the most interest. I basically just look at it every few months just to see where the money should go. There are also some companies who are notorious for not paying market rates in their money market funds. So make sure that whichever one you have your money in, that you're making, you actually double check that you're making the appropriate interest rate. Nowadays, they're paying in the 5% range. Managing your debt is probably the biggest, thing you guys need to keep a handle on, because if there's one thing that's going to screw up doctors, it's probably getting crazy with debt. I know early in your career, I was talking to the TY interns yesterday. Some of these things we're going to talk about here are very difficult to do early in your career. But these are things that you want to get a handle on and make these aspirational goals. So you want to use credit cards for convenience and never carry a credit card balance. You want to, again, eventually get to the point where you're borrowing only for things that appreciate in value or increase your value. That would include things like real estate, education, or investing in businesses or side hustles. It would not include cars. And that's, if there's two things that are going to really screw up doctors' finances, it's buying really expensive cars and buying really expensive houses. And as we've already kind of looked at the list of cars that I've driven, even the $2,000 Okinawan beaters reliably got me from point A to point B. Now, they weren't very sexy, but they did get me around. And if you really want to get to the point where you are not borrowing money to buy cars, you are buying cars you can afford with cash that you have. Part of the reason why I'm also have been financially independent now for a number of years is because I'm debt free. I have no debt. You should make it your goal to either be completely debt free by the time you are retirement eligible, or perhaps if you have a mortgage with a really low interest rate, you are just strategically holding on to it because you believe you can make more by investing the money rather than paying your mortgage off. That was a lot easier a few years ago if you had one of the low rate mortgages, but nowadays with mortgages in a 7% range, if you had one of those, it would probably be better to make your goal to pay it off because the interest rate is too high. And finally, if you have student loans out there, there were yesterday about 30% of the room with the interns had student loans. I would say if you have anything that's in the 5 or 6 figure range, you should go to one of these companies here. Again, I don't get anything from these folks, but it's really nearly impossible to keep up with all the changes in student loans. For a couple of years, nobody had to pay anything. Now you have to pay again. Now there's all sorts of different rules and there are all sorts of different programs depending on what kind of loans you have to try to figure out whether you should refinance or try to get them forgiven. And I really just think you should spend a couple $100 to get an expert advice on your 5 or 6 figure student loan debt. Which will probably pay for itself. Make sure you're handling this most efficiently. So here's kind of the meat of how you guys are going to build wealth. And really what you really need to do is max out your retirement accounts. So at its most basic, if you're just a non-moonlighting military physician, we've already talked about how your goal is to save at least 20% of every dollar that comes into your house toward retirement. And remember, that does not include saving for college or houses or cars or whatever you're saving for. But this year in 2023, you can put up to $22,500 in the TSP. If you're over 50, you can put another $7,500 in there. If you're a combat tax zone, if you're ever deployed to a tax-free zone, you can put more in there. Commander Levi Kitchen, who's currently deployed actually, and is the department head of the ER here at Portsmouth. He did this when he deployed previously and wrote a blog post about how to do it. So you can go to the mccareer.org blog link there and read about it. In addition to your TSP, you can have an IRA. If you have a spouse, you can also have an IRA with them. You can put up to $6,500 in there in 2023, and you can put $1,000 more in there if you're greater than 50. You will note there are 2 kinds of IRA, just like there's 2 kinds of TSP. There's the traditional, where you're taking a tax deduction now, but you're going to owe taxes later when you pull the money out. And there's Roth, where you're paying the taxes now, and you will not owe any taxes later. Most people in the military, especially earlier in their career, should probably be using the Roth versions because you are probably earning less than you're going to make in the future, and you are probably in a lower tax rate now than you will be in the future. Although to be clear, it's completely impossible to know exactly what the tax brackets and rates are going to be in the future. But in general, military doctors make less than they'll make when they get out if they're practicing. So using the Roth is probably what most people would do. If you just want to hedge your bets, going 50-50 would be fine. But if you are going to go 50-50, you've got to do it in the TSP, because what you want is you need to, you're probably going to get to the point in your career, if you're not already, where you exceed the phase out limits. You can see there, 138,000 if you're single, 218,000 of income if you're married. Above these income limits, you are technically not allowed to contribute to a Roth IRA. However, there is a tax loophole and something called a backdoor Roth IRA. Again, White Coat Investor link there, that allows you to just contribute to a normal IRA and then roll it over to a Roth. However, at the end of the year, you need to have the balance in your traditional IRA to be 0 to avoid something called the pro rata rule, which is why if you're going to go 50-50, half Roth, half traditional, you're going to want to do it in your TSP. You're either going to have to go all traditional or all Roth in your IRA. Now, once you fill your TSP and you fill your IRA or IRAs, any money you have left goes in a taxable brokerage account. You basically have to pick an investment company, Vanguard, Fidelity, Schwab, whatever you want to use. I'd recommend Vanguard. We'll talk about why later. And you just put it in a taxable brokerage account. So that's what I do. I fill my TSP, I fill my IRA, I fill my wife's IRA, and then all the rest of my money I invest goes in taxable brokerage accounts. in total US and total international stock funds with Vanguard. Now, if you moonlight, and you moonlight as a 1099 independent contractor, not as an employee receiving a W-2, you can open up a solo 401k. You can also open up a SEP IRA, but it's much better to open up the solo 401k because the SEP IRA allows you to contribute a little less, and it will also mess up your backdoor Roth IRA. Again, White Coat Investor link, 7 ways to screw up a backdoor Roth IRA. So ultimately, there's a lot of people that moonlight and they want to be an employee and get a W-2 because it makes their life easy. They get their taxes paid for them, withheld for them. But you cannot open up a solo 401k. If you are willing to send in the quarterly taxes, which is really not that hard, and you open a solo 401k, you can put up to 20% of what you make moonlighting into your solo 401k, above and beyond the limits we just talked about on the previous slide in your TSP and your IRA. So you make $50,000 moonlighting, you can put $10,000 in your solo 401k. While I don't have one of these, my wife does because she's been an independent contractor a number of times. And so this is another account we use that we can put money into. Finally, at the bottom, people who are moonlighting, a lot of times they ask about incorporating. And there might be tax reasons you would want to incorporate, but people often are trying to do it because they want to protect themselves. They feel like forming an LLC or some other type of entity is going to offer them liability protection. And in general, it doesn't. So if you're going to be incorporating, it's going to be for tax reasons, not to get yourself some kind of liability protection. So the blended retirement system, I did write the White Coat Investor post on the blended retirement system. The link is right there. If you're in the blended retirement system, you're getting a match, and the match is free money, and it is monthly. So you have to make sure you don't fill your TSP too early. If you fill your TSP in October, you're going to miss out on your 5% match in November and December. So make sure you contribute every month, you do the math, and you don't fill your TSP too early. And the other thing I like to talk about when it comes to retirement is the value of a military pension. So what many people don't know is I routed resignation at year 10. I'm at 22 and a half years now, but I was getting out at year 10. I was deployed on a MU. I had accepted a job as a residency director, and I was getting out. And while I was floating around, the ER that I was supposed to go be the residency director in lost their contract, and they were going 90 days at a time, and they didn't know what they were going to be getting paid. So I pulled my resignation and stayed in. Now, when I was doing the math to try to figure out, by getting out of 10 years, I was giving up probably a 20-year 05 pension at a minimum. And even as a guy who's a super saver, super investor, really into this thing, trying to make the difference up between losing that pension was going to be very hard. So if you look at this chart, it's a chart from a report that Congress submits, that the DoD submits to Congress. And across the top is years of service, and down the left is rank. And at the bottom there, I pulled the numbers out for two pretty common exit points for the medical corps, 20-year 05 and 21-year 06. Those numbers, 1.46 million and 1.73 million, is approximately the value, the net present value, how much money you'd have to have as calculated by the DoD to equal that pension. In other words, if I was getting out at 10 years, over the next 10 years, where I could have stayed in until 20, and I would have gotten a 20-year 05 pension, I had to make up the value of that pension was valued at around $1.5 million. And trying to make that up in 10 years would have been very dependent on the investment return I would have gotten in the stock market, which you never would really know. But trying to make that up was not as hard, was not very easy. Now, I'm not a neurosurgeon. If you're a plastic surgeon or a neurosurgeon or an interventional radiologist or something that makes a lot of money in the civilian world, it would be very easy to make it up. But emergency medicine, like I am, is kind of middle of the road salary-wise. If you're in something that's toward the lower end of the salary and as far as specialties go, don't underestimate how valuable it is and how hard it is to equal the value of an inflation-adjusted, government-guaranteed military pension. Not to mention TRICARE access, pharmacy access, or the transfer of the GI Bill, which we will talk about later. Those are all hugely valuable as well. But if you're just looking at the value of a guaranteed inflation-adjusted income stream, very, very valuable, depending on your specialty. It's very easy for people to write that off. There's all sorts of reasons to get out of the military, but in the lower or medium compensated specialties, it's probably not for the pension. The pension is probably pretty valuable to those folks. So how do you guys know when you have enough? How do I know I have enough? There's something called the 4% rule. So let's just go through an example. Let's say you want to live on $10,000 a year retirement. That's what would give you the kind of retirement you want. So you need $120,000 a year. And let's say you stayed in long enough to have a $60,000 a year pension. That means you're going to need to generate $60,000 a year in additional income. You take whatever income you want to generate, you divide it by 4%. That tells you approximately how much money you're going to need in order to do it and never run out. So $60,000 divided by 4% equals $1.5 million. Another way to look at that is for every $40,000 you want to generate in retirement income and be able to adjust upwards for inflation, you will need approximately $1 million. So if you want to live on $200,000 a year in retirement, you're going to need $5 million, or you're going to need some combination of a pension and the money that can make up the difference. So what are you guys investing in your TSP and your IRA and possibly your solo 401k? You're going to be investing in stock and bond index funds or exchange traded funds or ETFs. You've got to take some risk with stocks and bonds to beat inflation. I'm not saying you need to buy or ever should really buy individual stocks or bonds. You can if you want to, but just know that you don't have to. And there's two types. And really the takeaway is that index funds over the long haul will beat what we call actively managed funds. So we need to briefly talk about what those are. So index funds just basically buy and hold a bunch of stocks or bonds or whatever they're investing in and take the return minus expenses. So there's a ton of these different things. And here are some common examples you can see listed on the left side of the screen. The S&P 500 is basically the 500 largest stocks in the United States. That is the TSP fund. There are total U.S. stock market funds. That's what I invest in at Vanguard. There is no equivalent in the TSP. So you have to do essentially a 3-to-1 ratio of the C and the S fund in order to do that. I have all my international stock money at Vanguard with the total international stock market because there's no TSP equivalent that will do that. We'll talk about why the I fund doesn't do that here in a second. Total U.S. bond market, there's the F fund in the TSP. And there's other indices and other things, but let's just focus on the S&P 500. An actively managed fund that was comparable to the S&P 500 would basically be a large cap stock fund. And on the active side, there'd be fund managers in a room with a bunch of computers trying to beat the S&P 500. And in order to do that, they have to buy and sell, and they're going to generate fees and taxes for the people that invest in the fund, which increases the fund expenses. And while they may be able to do that for 1, 2, or 3, or maybe even more years, over the long haul of your investing career, they're not going to be able to do it for 15 or 20 or 25 or 30 years. So over the long haul, the index funds wind up beating the actively managed funds. There will probably be some active funds that will beat index funds, but you will never know which ones they are until it's already happened. So you just buy the index funds and you just roll with it. Now, you're not going to be able to control the return you get in the market during your career, but there are two things you can control. The first one is cost, and the second one is asset allocation. So what seem like little tiny costs make a huge difference. We're talking 6 or 7 figures over your investing career. So here's kind of just a hypothetical to make the point. Let's say grandma gave you $10,000 and you invested it for 50 years in the S&P 500, this TSPC fund, earned about a 9.5% return. There's something called an expense ratio. And the expense ratio for the TSP at the time I made this slide was 0.032%. And what that meant is if the S&P 500, the C fund made 10%, I lost 0.032% of that to run the fund for expenses. Now, at the same time, State Farm, which seems like a reputable insurance company, had an S&P 500 fund investing in the exact same thing with an expense ratio of 1.36%. So instead of making 10 minus 0.032%, they would have made 10 minus 1.36%. And that seems like a very small percentage, but that 1.33% difference over an investing lifetime of 50 years would essentially take 421,000 of my 921 I would have made with the C fund. So these tiny little percentages over your long investing career can add up to significant amounts of money, which is why you want to do everything you can to minimize the investing cost of what you're investing in. And there's really two easy ways. We're all busy, and this is just the absolute easy way to make sure you never get ripped off when it comes to costs. And that's to invest in the TSP, because all the stuff they offer, all the basic TSP funds are are among the lowest cost funds that exist. And if you go to Vanguard, which is what I do, Vanguard's run at a nonprofit. It's owned by its investors. Everything is run at cost. And although you can go to Fidelity and Schwab and E-Trade and other places and find perhaps even lower cost funds, you will also at those places find high cost funds. So you can invest at Fidelity and Schwab if you know what you're doing and be fine, but you can also very easily get in trouble. At Vanguard, it does not matter what you pick. Everything is being run at cost, and it will be among the lowest cost investments in that category. So to me, the easiest thing to do is to just stick to these two companies if at all possible. The other thing, in addition to costs that you guys can control, is your asset allocation, which at its most basic involves your allocation of stocks to bonds. And there are other things you can invest in, but they are all optional. So here is an asset allocation chart that shows you over a long time period. If you start on the left side with the blue, that's 100% bond allocation. So you can see at the top of that blue bar that it's in the best year, you made 32.6%. In the worst year, you lost 8.1%. And on average, the number in the middle, you made 5.3%. As you move to the right, you'll see they increase the stock allocation and get riskier by 10%, all the way up to 100% stocks in bright red on the right side. In the best year, you made 54%. In the worst year, though, you lost almost half your money, 43.1%. But on average, you made more. The more stocks you invested in, the more you made on average historically. So everyone that's listening to this is going to have a slightly different risk tolerance. And so what you generally want to do is you want to figure out how much risk you can stomach and take it. And so how do you figure that out? Well, there's a couple of different ways. There's a lot of different ways, but here are some easier ones. I'll recommend a bunch of books at the end, all of which are short. But the book in the top right there, The Elements of Investing, I think it's 134 pages long. It's a very quick read. And they have a suggested asset allocation in there, and you'll see it on the screen. If you're aggressive, you're tolerant, you don't care about the stock market going up and down, it doesn't freak you out, you can have a potential 100% stock allocation all the way up into your 40s and 50s. If you're more conservative, they would recommend in your 40s and 50s somewhere between 80 and 90% stocks and 10 to 20% bonds. Now, what I've done my whole career is I stayed aggressive. I was 100% stocks most of the time. And then when I hit my number, using the 4% rule, I downshifted to conservative because I was no longer trying to win. I was trying not to lose. So I'm currently sitting around 70% stocks, 30% bonds. And again, everybody's going to have their own goals, their own asset allocation. One way to figure out what you should be doing is using these charts. Another way to do it would be to take the Vanguard Investor Questionnaire. It's 13 questions. There's a link right there in the middle of the screen. It'll give you an asset allocation suggested for your individual situation. For example, when I take it, it says 80% stocks, 20% bonds. If you don't want to worry about this at all, and you just want to figure it out later, you just want to hit the easy button, you can use these things called life cycle funds or target retirement funds. So what you do is you just figure out what year you think you're going to start pulling money out of your retirement account. Let's just say it's year 2060 or around that time. You would just invest in the TSP Life Cycle 2060 or the Vanguard Retirement 2060. But you're only going to be able to do this in a retirement account. You can technically do it in a taxable brokerage account, but the way they run the funds can sometimes cause you tax problems. This happened at Vanguard a year or two ago. So really, these funds are only appropriate for retirement accounts. But they are the easy button. And you may find that they are more conservative than you would normally be, or some of the calculators or the charts would suggest, but they are, again, the easy button, and everything is just kind of on autopilot for you. But really, again, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you are taking as much risk as you can stomach. You take as much risk as you can so that when the market is down, you do not stop investing. You do not sell stocks. You continue to buy stocks because they are on sale and they are cheap. You need an asset allocation that you can stick to when the market tanks. So last year was a great time to figure out whether you are taking too much risk, because last year, for the first time in a long time, both stocks and bonds went down. So how nervous did you get last year? If you got nervous and or you sold stocks in order to buy more bonds or go to cash, you're taking too much risk and you probably need to dial down your stock allocation. At the same time, if you were fine and it didn't worry you at all, and you just kept piling money into your accounts, then you're probably taking an appropriate amount of risk, or you could take more. So everybody's going to be different, and you just have to try to figure out where your asset allocation should be. Here are some mistakes and some changes. So some mistakes, we already talked about BRS. If you're in the blended retirement system, you don't want to fill your TSP too early or you'll lose the match. I've also seen numerous people borrow from their TSP. There are definitely reasons that the IRS will allow you to take money out of retirement accounts. But in general, when you put money in retirement accounts, you should consider it off limits, except for an absolute god-awful dire emergency. And that's why you have an emergency fund, so you don't have to touch these things. When you put money in retirement accounts, it should stay there. I would also encourage people to never base their TSP contributions on their special pays, because if the Navy has done one thing in my career, the Navy has screwed up my special pay. And so when it screws up your special pay and you're relying on your TSP contributions for that, then it screws up your TSP. So really, you want to use your monthly contribution to your TSP. You want it based on your base pay. Finally, for mistakes, if you want to use the iFund in the TSP for your international stock exposure, there's nothing wrong with it. But you need to understand that the iFund is not a total international stock fund. It does not invest in emerging markets. For example, it is not invested in China. And whether you want to invest in China or not is up to you. But China is a huge economy with the potential for a lot of growth. And so I would like to invest in it. So all my international stock exposure is in the Vanguard Total International Stock Fund. I don't use the iFund at all. Nothing wrong with the iFund, but just understand if you do use it, you're not investing in the emerging markets, which, although they are probably the most volatile markets, they are also the ones with the potential for the most growth. Some changes recently, we finally got an app for the TSP. They updated their website. They continue to make changes there. And then there's this thing called the window. You can now invest in just about anything you want in the TSP. But again, I would not recommend it, because if you want to invest in something different, do it in your IRA. But as you try to do it in your TSP, they charge you a bunch of fees. And we've already talked about how fees can add up over time. I would not recommend doing anything in the TSP other than investing in the most basic stuff. If there's something else you want to invest in, you can do it in your IRA, or you can do it in your taxable brokerage account. Almost done. The military likes to move us every 2 or 3 years a lot of the time. So you have to make an intelligent rent versus buy decision. You've kind of saw in the beginning of this, I had all my houses up. I've kind of alternated between buying and renting. In general, in order to make it worthwhile to buy something rather than rent, it takes 3 to 5 years. Some would say up to 7. So with the military moving us frequently, oftentimes, although not the American dream, the right financial answer in the military is going to be to rent. And there's nothing wrong with that. You are not throwing money away, as people would say. It is expensive to own real estate. And if you're not going to be there for 3 to 5 to 7 years, it's probably the right answer is probably to just rent. It is also very easy, like we talked about, to buy too much house. That is probably the #1 downfall of doctors. And if you just want to check yourself, if you're buying a property, I'm not saying you have to use a 15-year fixed mortgage, but if you couldn't afford it with a 15-year fixed mortgage, you might want to say, am I buying too much house? Maybe I should rent. Maybe I should save up more money or put more money down. But now this is very difficult in places like DC and San Diego. So, you gotta deal with the real estate market you want to live in. But again, this is just a check to keep yourself out of trouble. Last step we're going to talk about is saving for future college expenses. Pretty easy. If you want to put money somewhere, you're going to use a 529 plan. You can use any state's plan. If you go to savingforcollege.com, the link at the bottom there's a brief algorithm that'll run you through. That'll help you figure out whether your state that you pay state taxes in or wherever you're a resident, whether they have a good plan, whether there's any tax savings by using it. I'm from Pennsylvania. I've always just used the Nevada plan, which is run by Vanguard, because I wanted it to be very easy to use, and there was really minimal benefit for my taxes in Pennsylvania. So I use the Nevada plan, some other good plans, or New York has a good plan, Utah has a good plan. But really, if you go to Saving for College, you can run through their little algorithm and you can figure out whether you have a good plan or not in your state. If you've served 6 years and you're willing to serve 4 more, which can be active, guard, or reserve, you can transfer your GI Bill to your dependents. And so for the first half of my working career, I put money in a 529 plan. My wife had a GI Bill, though, and so did I. We weren't probably going to use them for ourselves. So we transferred them to our children, and we've used both our GI Bills to pay for now 2 undergraduate educations. My daughter's done. It was awesome. My son's a sophomore. It is awesome. It's really a great program, hugely valuable. We've had no complaints about using the GI Bill. It's been very easy. Colleges know how to do it. So we're going to stop for questions, but really this talk is you guys got to answer one question. Do you need a financial planner? If you're interested in this and you're willing to learn about it, you can probably do most of this yourself and just get an expert opinion when you need it. But if you have absolutely no interest and you're not willing to learn about it, you should probably use an advisor. Yesterday, when I was giving this talk to the TY interns, 4 people were willing to tell me who they use for their financial advisor. All 4 answers they gave were bad. Not something I would recommend. I would not recommend any of these companies were used, but yeah, people in the room were using them. I would go to either Vanguard or I would go to the White Coat Investor or Physician on Fire. All of whom are really both of those are really well regarded blogs. If you go with any of their financial advisors, you'll be paying a fair price for good advice. They're not going to try to sell you whole life insurance. They're not going to put you in high expense funds or actively managed funds. You're going to get good advice that's going to stick to generally what we talked about. And if you're not willing to learn about this or do it yourself, then that's probably what you need to do. But, the financial planning industry is an industry designed to take money from your pocket and put it in their pocket. So it's very easy to get ripped off. I can virtually guarantee you the people that were mentioned yesterday when I gave this, that just about all of them are getting ripped off because they're using what I would consider to be bad financial planners. So if you're interested in this stuff, here's some books. I would really highly recommend these books. You read these, you're going to get a mini MBA. The one in the middle there that says Get a Financial Life, Personal Finance in Your 20s and 30s, that's probably the best book I've ever read, especially early in my career. It has a chapter on everything we talked about and more. Any of the White Coat Investors books are great. We already talked about the elements of investing in the upper right. Boglehead's 3-fund portfolio, it's like 80 pages long. Tells you how to do all your investing with a very simple 3-fund portfolio, which is basically what I do. Jonathan Clemens in the upper left wrote How to Think About Money, which is a great book. And then I would recommend the original Millionaire Next Door because there's about 10 or 15 pages that they took out in the second edition. And those 10 or 15 pages talk about how stupid doctors are with money. And I think it's just gold to read. So I would recommend you get the older version and check that out. Some good online resources, the Bogleheads Wiki. The Bogleheads are John Bogle is the founder of Vanguard. So Bogleheads are people that ascribe to the Vanguard philosophy of low-cost index investing. Great resource there. Jonathan Clemens, the guy that wrote the book, How to Think About Money, he has an online money guide that's free. I got my links there. And we've already talked a bunch about the White Coat Investor, which is probably the best place to go if you're a physician and you're interested in learning about personal finance. Special pay. So we just came out with the special pay plan. So I usually just try to mention to people a reminder that if you're a resident, when you graduate, you're going to be eligible for the GMO pay. So the day after you graduate, so you're going to want to apply for that. And then people that just graduated this last year, As of 3 days ago, whenever the plan came out, they can now apply for their specialty incentive pay, which will be backdated to 1 October as long as you get it in within 30 days. And I also recommend people get this handled at the MTF where they're training before they detach, because sometimes you'll find yourself at commands that don't really know how to handle special pays. So that's it. That's my contact info. I'm easy to reach generally. If you can't find me online, it means your internet's not working. And I'm happy to talk to people, help people out as best as I can. But I'll stop there and see if anybody has any questions about any of this stuff. You can raise your hand or you can chat. So I see, let's see, regarding your recommendation for Vanguard, a few years ago, USA moved its investments to Schwab and Victory. For those of us who have Roth IRAs with Schwab due to this USAA transition, is your recommendation to move the entire Roth IRA to Vanguard? It's up to you. There's nothing wrong with Schwab, but Schwab offers high expense and actively managed fees and funds. So you can get in trouble. I mean, if you know what you're doing and you stick to just plain old vanilla low cost index funds, it'll be fine. But like the example I like to use is Fidelity, like great company, but we talked about the target retirement funds. They have two versions. One is composed of low cost index funds. The other is composed of higher cost actively managed funds. They all look just about the same. The names are almost identical. So it'd be very easy to get yourself in trouble at Fidelity. You can't do that at Vanguard. So I wouldn't definitely move everything to Vanguard. The complaint about Vanguard is that they've grown so much that their customer service potentially could be a trouble. Hot mic out there, by the way. But I have not personally experienced that. I've had no problem using their website or their customer service, but there are some complaints online about it, and some people that say Schwab and Fidelity have better customer service. Can I please explain the 4% rule again? So essentially, you take whatever amount of money you want to generate in income for your retirement, and you divide it by 4%. That's how much money you're going to need to have in general in order to do it. The other way to look at it is for every $40,000 that you want to generate for your retirement, you will need $1 million, because 4% of $1 million is 40,000. So that's kind of the explanation of the 4% rule. Is UBS a good financial planner? I have no idea, but whoever's using it, if you look at the expense ratio of your funds, or you look at what they're investing you in, and you go on Morningstar and you compare and you look at the expense ratios, you could probably tell. If you're below 0.5%, you're probably okay. But I mean, there's nothing at Vanguard that's going to be above 0.3%. And probably my collective expense ratio for all my investments is less than 0.1%. So I don't know personally anything about UBS, but it would be take me about 2 seconds if you email me and tell me what they've invested you in to figure out whether you're getting ripped off or not, or there'd probably be better ways to, invest. So, can I review the value of the pension and the numbers you calculated again? Sure. So if we just go back, it's just a chart, and I can all these slides I can email them to Commander Treadwell. She can email them out. They are on my blog, mccareer.org, in the personal finance tab. But this chart that's on the screen is a chart from the DoD that they submit to Congress, and across the top is years of service, and down the left is rank. And so really, you can look up any years of service and rank, and what you'll see is the net present value. That's the approximate value of the pension. So the two common exit points for the medical corps are 20-year 05, 21-year 06. And you can see that in both cases, 20-year 05 pension, the value of it is probably about 1.5 million, and the value of a 21-year 06 pension is about 1.73 million. Now, if you're in the BRS, you're going to have to take 20% off of these numbers because you'd get only 80% of the pension. But the point is, if you're a low to mediumly compensated physician specialty, the pension is very valuable and very hard to equal if you get out. If you're a neurosurgeon, plastic surgeon, interventional radiologist, or something that makes a lot of money, it's less of a concern if you get out at year 10 or whatever year you're getting out, because you can probably make enough money that you could make up the pension value and more. But if you're a medium or low compensated specialty, really tough to make up the value of this pension. What is the symbol for total international stock market? Well, it depends what company you're using. And I mean, if you just Google Vanguard Total International Stock Market, and it's also going to depend on whether you're using a fund or an ETF, either of which would be fine. So if you just Google Vanguard Total International Stock Market Fund or Total International Stock Market ETF, you'd be able to grab those. VXUS, yeah, it looks like somebody put that in there for the ETF. So the match, can I comment again on the 5% match for the TSP? So if you're in the blended retirement system and you're getting the match, it's a monthly match. So if you fill your TSP in October, you're not going to get the match in November or December. So you have to make sure you don't fill your TSP too early. Otherwise, you're losing out on the match. So you got to make sure you fill it. You contribute at least 5% every month. Otherwise, you don't get your match. That's basically, that's what Commander Treadwell put in there. But I think I got everything in the chat. Is there anybody that wants to raise their hand, or is there anything else you guys want? I'm going to stop presenting. Come back on camera. Anything anything else? If not, that's cool.
So there's a question. What's the breakdown of the different types of markets you'd have in TSP, US, international, etc.?
Yeah, that depends. So if you're going to use your TSP, look, like for example, for me, I have a 70-30 allocation. I already told you guys stocks and bonds. Now that's across, I add all my accounts together and look at them in total. All my wife's accounts, the TSP, we have 2 of them, all our IRAs, full 401ks, taxable brokerage accounts, everything. I make sure that's close to 70% stocks, 30% bonds. I don't personally invest in international bonds, so all my bonds are US bonds. I have them all in the TSP. I do half F, half G. That's what I do. Many ways to skin that cat. When it comes to total US stocks versus international stocks, you will find some people who will recommend you need nothing but US. You will find some people who will say you should go with the market, which is essentially about half, 50% US, 50% international. What I do is I do what Vanguard does. Vanguard's research shows you should have 60% US, 40% international. So that's what I do. My 70% stocks is 28% international and the rest US, because I do a 60-40 breakdown. Some people recommend 80-20, some people recommend 70-30, some people recommend 50-50, some 90-10, some 100-0. Anything between 20 and 50% international stock allocation is probably reasonable, and it'd be very hard to make an argument against it. I just don't think, I personally just think that you should spread your bets and diversify as much as you can. So I would not personally recommend you have less than 20% of your stocks international. But again, if John Bogle, who founded Vanguard, didn't think you needed it, he says that the US stock companies are international already. Coca-Cola is international. You don't need to invest internationally, but if you don't invest internationally, you're missing out on companies like Toyota, which is not a US company, as an example. So, that's why we use a Google Sheet. Again, some of those automated tools will link to all your accounts, and they will tell you what your allocation is, and they'll tell you what your US to international breakdown is. I just round everything to $1,000. I manually update it every month, do my investing. Whatever I'm low in, I put the money in, and then once a year, my wife and I do it together. So, anything else? All right, Commander Treadwell, you need anything?
So I was just going to thank you for coming. I'm also going to show my screen and remind everybody that we are working on our social media so that we can get more medical students, more residents, more staff, so that we can help everybody feel a little less pressure in the field and in the MTF. So please send in your photos. And again, thank you so much, Captain Schofer. I know we had a lot of really great questions. A lot of people are very interested in watching your video. And I thank everybody for coming as well. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend,
thanks.
everyone.
Portsmouth out. See you guys later.
Thank you so much again, sir.